Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Talk Gaming. I am your host, Luke, and today we're doing the episodes a little bit differently. For those of you who have not been following along with like social media, the Discord, and the update videos, all of that, basically my internet provider sucks. So doing this show live, as of right now, is not really doable because the internet is dropping out roughly every 45 minutes, which obviously is not a great thing to have going on while you're trying to live stream. So in place of a live streamed episode of Talk Gaming, we're going to do a little higher quality pre-recorded episode where we can talk about all of the stuff that you guys have been begging me to talk about, such as E3, Cyberpunk, and today specifically what we're going to be discussing are RPGs in 2018 and where this is going, because the world is kind of upside down, shall we say. So we're going to talk about all of this. We're going to cover it. And we're going to break it apart one by one. But before we jump into it by first discussing Cyberpunk, I do just want to mention this video and everything on this channel is possible as a result of not just the Patreons, people on Patreon who support me, so the patrons, but also all of those out there who have chosen to support me through the new merch store, which I will have links to down in the comment section or down in the description section below. I highly recommend you check it out. We've got some pretty cool stuff over there. And it comes back and it helps support the channel, so why not? But with all of that said, let's just jump right into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about, the first thing we're going to look at is Cyberpunk 2077, of course. And this rundown was given by PC Gamer. They did a really good job rounding everything up. But I haven't really expressed all of my opinions on this quite yet. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, I wanted to process it. Obviously, I didn't get to see the gameplay loop. A lot of YouTubers got to go in and got to see the actual gameplay footage and the demo that they were giving in real time. I was not one of those people. So as a result, I'm going off of what other people are saying about that demo, off of those first-person accounts, but still it's not like I got to see the gameplay. So I've spent some time listening to those interviews, watching those videos, trying to figure out exactly what this game is going to have to offer and what I think about it and how it's going to impact the general gaming community. And the general consensus among those who have seen the gameplay is that it is ridiculous. It's like so far above and beyond what anybody else is doing in the industry right now. It's hard to quantify, and we wouldn't really expect anything else of CD Projekt Red. They just keep raising the bar once and again, and it's blowing everybody out of the water. And it looks like Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be one such game that does just that. So as we run down and run through these, I do want to just break it apart, and we're going to try to figure out what is going to work well, what we like, what we don't like about this game and its respective design elements. So the first thing, of course, everyone's asking about is whether or not the game is coming out this year or anytime close to it. I would not say this year, certainly not. Maybe a late 2019 or May 2019 release is possible. But CD Projekt Red hasn't said anything about a release date, simply saying when it's done, they'll release it, which is great because they're not pushing it out before it's ready. They're not pushing out a Mass Effect Andromeda, but it is a little frustrating because we still don't know. And especially now that we've smelled the roses, we've tasted the forbidden fruit, it's a little frustrating because we all just want it. So there's no word exactly on when it's coming, but it is sounding as though it's very far along. CD Projekt Red is a publicly traded company out of Poland, and so financially you can figure out roughly what they're planning to do. And if you look at their 10K forums on all of those, they've amassed a fair amount of cash that's just sitting in their coffers. And usually in the gaming industry, what that's indicative of is preparing for a large blitzkrieg of advertising, which would make sense with the game coming out early next year. They're amassing that money. They're going to start buying out the time, those slots, and they're going to start preparing the ads so that they can start running them in full force. Now, is it going to be something where they wait and do it like late next year or 2020? Maybe. Are they going to hold out for next gen consoles? Excuse me. Maybe. Like, it's not clear. It seems as though they're developing. There was one interview where they were saying that they are developing this game for current gen consoles. So it's like that hasn't stopped any developer from pushing it and sliding it over to next gen consoles before. So it's still possible that that's going to happen. But as of right now, there's no real clear mentionings of when it's coming out. But I would say probably, if I had put my money on it, somewhere around late 2019 into early 2020 would be where I'd put my money. And at that point, we're getting close to next gen consoles around 2020. And at that point, they might just push it back by another 6 months or a year to try to just hook it on to the next gen as like a launch title. So we'll just have to see. It's one of those games that's so ambitious, I could see it working either which way, but we'll just have to wait and find out. Other big updated news that like freaked a lot of people out for some stupid reason is that Cyberpunk 2077 is a first person shooter, and this freaked a lot of people out. I don't really understand this. So like, first of all, the game has a character creation element. So you make your own character, and that's great. You're playing a character named V, so you can be male, female, whatever. You can be a dragon, unicorn, baby. I don't care. But you can create your own character, and as you're creating your own character, you design them in a certain way, and you can upgrade certain things, like, of course, outfits. You can upgrade armor, whatever you're doing. You can upgrade and improve that, but being first person, you aren't going to constantly see it. Now, the important thing is that during cutscenes and like loading things and driving sequences, it switches to third person, or at least as of right now in the demo it does. Will that be the same during launch or at launch? Who knows? But as of right now, that's what it is. So it's really hard to say if this is like costing some level of immersion. If anything, I think it works better. This game has shooting mechanics, and third person shooters are not my favorite thing. They're not my forte. Like, a lot of them are good, but it's just, I prefer being able to go into first person for shooters specifically. So I'm okay with it. Especially apparently the gameplay is very fast paced during the combat sequences. And so if it were in third person, it could feel quite clunky, and it could feel very staggered and stuttered, which you don't want. So I'm okay with it being in first person, but a lot of people freaked out when they found out that it was. I don't understand why that freaks so many people out, but nonetheless, it does. So that's a thing that happened. As for other things, the character creation seems pretty straightforward and simple. This quote off of the PC Gamer article says you can also change your stats during the character creation segment, like your starting stats. There are basic things like strength and intelligence, but also a cool stat that perhaps maps to charisma or one's ability to handle stress. The full list from what we saw in the demo was strength, constitution, intelligence, reflexes, tech, and cool. Notably, there are some important stats from the tabletop Cyberpunk game not represented here, like empathy, which like could work, or they could add that in. It's not really clear. It's a little late to add in that mechanic, but what you see a lot of the time with these types of games is that there are still those stats being represented, but they're all under the hood, so you don't see them. So for instance, in Skyrim, one thing a lot of people didn't realize was that just like in Sims, like when you're playing Sims, you know how you are talking, you have one character talk to another character, and then their relationship improves, and then you see a little heart show up, and then you can actually read in the menus what somebody's relationship is with another NPC. So you can actually read, oh, this character is in love with this character hates this character, or is neutral, whatever. That system is also in a game like Skyrim or Fallout 4 or The Witcher 3 to some extent, but it's all under the hood, so you never have to think about it. You never have to notice it. Now, some people like it being up above so that you can see what's going on. Another example of burying a system for whatever reason would be like in Fallout New Vegas, for instance, when you're talking to people and you basically, if you have certain stats, so if you have a certain level of like explosive skill, you can see that there's a dialogue option for you to be like, hey, I can jimmy up some dynamite to take care of this issue that we're faced with. And that's great, because if you had the explosive skill, it should show up. But what they also did is, even when you didn't have the explosive skill or the lockpick ability or what have you, or the charisma, you would still see the option, but it would just be blacked out and you couldn't actually choose it. So you would constantly be reminded, oh, if I pursued that, I could actually have this upgraded ability. I could do stuff that I can't do right now. So there's two sides of burying gameplay mechanics. On the one hand, burying like your perception of people around you can make it a little more, I suppose, engaging or immersive maybe would be the word, because on the one hand, you don't have to constantly think about it in a gamey fashion. They become more characters and people. But at the other side, and on the other side of the coin, I actually like being able to see exactly what's going on, because after all, we are playing a video game. We aren't dealing with real people. So I can see both sides of it. But nonetheless, who knows? Maybe empathy will return in the actual stats. But as of right now, I mean, the list that they gave us, strength, constitution, intelligence, reflexes, tech, and cool, that covers most of your bases. Like that's pretty solid. There's not a whole lot that's left out of that. And those, in varying degrees and mixtures, should be able to cover most of your bases. And if you think back to The Witcher 3, the way that leveling system worked, it wasn't like what you see in a lot of older RPGs where you just are adding and moving numbers around. It was much more in the world. So it was grounded in the world. So when you wanted to upgrade an ability, you were upgrading Quen in some degree, or Axii, to gain a new ability within that power. You weren't trying to add, oh, I've got to raise that from 52 to 57 so that I can pass this gate, so that I can do this, this, and this. So I think there's ways of balancing it so that it's not just a stat sheet, but it's also still grounded in the game, but it's not fully casual and you don't have to ever think about it. So I don't know. Once again, so much of this is really hard to say without playing the game. And even if we were playing the same demo that they showed off, it wouldn't do us a whole lot of good, because things like this have a tendency to change, especially as you approach release. So we'll see. Another cool thing we found out about romantic relationships. So that's a thing, just like in The Witcher 3. Lots of romance options. They've said that the romance options are going to be much more diverse, quote unquote, than they were in The Witcher 3. As to what that actually means, who knows? What the Quest designer, Patrick Mills, said in an interview with Game Informer was, quote, there are a lot more options. You know, you're defining your own character here, which means defining their sexuality any way you want. With Geralt, you had a character whose sexuality was very well defined by the novels and the short stories and the previous games. But in this one, it's up to you to decide. We've got NPCs that are gay, we've got NPCs that are bi, we've got NPCs that are straight, because we want them to feel real and that they have preferences as well. End quote. So before like the internet explodes and everyone freaks out that they're getting all SJW, I don't see it that way. I don't think this is like pushing some sort of social agenda. Once again, it's just opening up the world to varying degrees of play. But most importantly to me is the fact that the last few words here, that they have preferences as well. The characters, you know, one of my issues with, what's a good example of a game? Like Mass Effect, what I believe had a lot of this as an issue, where just any character, if you wanted to get in with them, or like The Sims, for instance, if you're a dude and you want to pursue another dude, it doesn't matter if that dude's straight, they're still going to be bumping uglies, because that's just what they do. There's no preferences. There's no time when the character you're trying to pursue is like, oh no, I'm gay, I don't swing that way with you, or I'm straight, I don't go that way. Like, you never ran into a no. And no, as a consequence, is just as important as yes. What does yes mean if there's no to contrast it, right? So if there's consequences to your actions, it doesn't mean anything unless there's also negative consequences. If there's just good consequences, like, oh, you did this thing, awesome job. Oh, you did that other thing that you would expect there to be like really negative consequences to, oh, well, good job. That doesn't mean anything. But because there's preferences and there's yeses and nos, times when like I might find one character on screen super hot and I want to pursue that character and take them back to my apartment, but they're like, oh, sorry, I like robot chickens. I don't date humans or androids or whatever you are. Like, that's a very real consequence. And I make a mental note, like, okay, well, I'll have to make another playthrough where I play as a robot chicken. So I like the fact that there's still preferences. The characters aren't just yes men, which is an issue we've run into in a lot of modern RPGs, where they just say yes to everything and there's no actual consequences. There's just stuff you can do, which is not an RPG. Do not mistake it for one. Another question, and we're just going down this bullet point from PC Gamer. This one is Cyberpunk 2077 mature rated like The Witcher 3, and they say yeah. They say Cyberpunk 2077 is not for kids and definitely seems to be leaning into its inevitable mature rating. In the first few minutes of the demo, V rescued a woman kidnapped by organ scavengers. She was found naked in a bathtub, and the game didn't flinch away from full nudity. In the demo, we played a female V who, during a cutscene that showed her morning routine, was wearing pretty skimpy clothing, and there was a ton of swearing as expected, but also what sounded like masturbation jokes and more. Cyberpunk 2077 looks keen to capitalize on the punk, which again shouldn't surprise you if you're familiar with the original tabletop game. This shouldn't surprise you because the game is more mature in terms of thematics, and it only makes sense. So I'm glad to hear that they're not trying to tame it down. It should be a mature game if they want it to feel grounded, feel real, and I'm glad that they're not shying away from that. So that's good. That's good. Organ scavengers. Thumbs up from Luke. How does dialogue work? Well, in a lot of RPGs, dialogue sections basically put the game on pause while two characters talk stiffly back and forth. It's not the best way to deliver the story, and thankfully Cyberpunk 2077 has massive improvements in this area. While we're not 100% certain, all dialogue appears to happen in real time. You can continue moving and looking around, but when you focus the camera back on the character you're speaking to, dialogue options appear on screen. There were usually 3 or 4 options at a time, which does not suggest the system won't be as robust as in some other RPGs. Basically, it reminds me of Fallout 4's dynamic conversation system. So the world doesn't pause when you're talking. Stuff still happens around you. And you can walk away from a conversation. You can turn back. So if you're talking with a character and you see something awesome over there, you can look over and you can see, and then you go, okay, we were talking back to what we were doing. So I like that. I liked that system. I didn't like how dumbed down the conversations were, but we'll see how this works. Let's see. They say we're okay with that, though, because this new system and the first-person perspective make for some incredibly tense exchanges. When V and her sidekick Jackie arrived at a Maelstrom gang hideout with the intention of buying a powerful piece of gear, the deal almost went sour. In the middle of the dialogue sequence, characters including V started drawing weapons and pointing them at one another. Meanwhile, dialogue prompts kept appearing to let you try to steer the situation. Do you try to keep calm or open fire? In this situation, we finally managed to de-escalate by showing the thugs that we had the money and weren't looking to screw them over. In an earlier scene, V was apprehended by a group of corporate agents. These extremely deadly characters were looking for information and mistook V as someone they were looking for. While they pinned her to the ground, they jacked into her cyberware and installed a lie detector app and began an interrogation. If we lied, they would know it immediately. And there would be consequences because of that. This new system feels fluid and natural. There's no longer the clear distinction of entering and exiting a conversation with someone. Everything flows together. End quote. And that sounds pretty good. That sounds solid. And I think when we saw it in Fallout 4, it was a very infantile, maybe that's a bad word for it. It was just a very early and not fleshed out version of that system, where I could see what they were trying to do. They were trying to make it engaging and immersive and fluid, so everything worked together as it's described in this, but it wasn't done in the way that actually does that and makes it seem that way, because it was still very jarring. It was start and stop, start and stop, start and stop. So you were always limited by those factors. It just wasn't. It was fluid, but it wasn't. If you turned away and stopped a conversation to do something else, came back, the character you were talking to was not aware that you stepped away. It was like everything was back to normal, nothing actually altered, and it just wasn't fully fleshed out. So I'm glad to see that they apparently have taken that to the next level, because it needed it. As with any RPG, abilities are a major point of consideration. In Cyberpunk 2077, they're known as augments. At least some of them are known as augments. Quote, cyberware refers to augments that have all sorts of uses. During the demo, we visited a Ripper doc who could upgrade and replace our cyberware. We opted for a Kuroshi optical implant that let us zoom in on objects and also analyze the environment, seeing enemy levels and getting detailed information about them. We also picked up a subdermal grip for our gun hand, which increases the damage we do when firing guns. The implants are wildly cool, but it's strange that they don't seem to have downsides in a game world which, at least in its tabletop incarnation, stressed the dangerous sides of cyberware with mental illnesses like cyber psychosis. It's a facet of the universe that we know the developers are aware of. The 2013 reveal trailer featured a woman getting arrested by a CSWAT team for going off of the deep end. On the tabletop, in the tabletop game, a character's empathy and humanity stats dictated how much cyberware it was safe for them to use, but empathy seems absent from Cyberpunk 2077. So this seems like something they might have gutted from the game, or at least removed or altered in some way. And it might simply have just not translated well into the video game setting, specifically empathy and limitations on these sorts of alterations, because as with everything, you always want to be able to upgrade and upgrade and upgrade and upgrade. And if they have limits, like, oh, you can only have 5 enhancements at a time or augments at a time, before you start to go crazy, that's not quite as fun. If they open the cap up and like, yeah, the more that you have, the more dangerous you are, and you're going to start seeing distortions, you're going to lose charisma. Like, maybe that's how they're implementing it, where it affects your other stats as opposed to limiting how many augments you can get. So the higher your augments are and the more you rely on them, the less your charisma is, so you have to rely on your augments more and your charisma less. Maybe something like that has been implemented. It's just hard to tell because they didn't delve into that very heavily, which is okay. Like, excuse me, those leveling things can be tweaked so heavily in the span between now and launch. It's hard to get upset or frustrated about it now, because we simply don't know. As for cars, you can of course drive. There's shootouts in the cars. There's all sorts of stuff. It's a huge city with 6 districts. It seems like they've really fleshed it out. How interactive are the environments, both in and out of combat? There were many ways that the people who played the demo could mess with the environment. Out in the open world, advertisements for products could be touched, giving you a market on your HUD where that item could be purchased. We used that to buy some soda from a vending machine that would help us heal over time. In combat, we saw light destructible elements in certain areas. When fighting a boss character in an exosuit, for example, V shot a lift holding a car to drop it to ground level, creating some on-the-fly cover to hide behind. So it seems as though destructible environments to some extent have been added, and that's good to hear. It's not going to be like, oh, you can destroy a skyscraper, but it is going to be something to the degree where when you're in a situation that's tough, you can alter the environment in some small ways, and it's going to dynamically accommodate that type of style. So that's good to hear. As for the feel and the look, what they said is, thanks to some awesome crowd technology, the Cyberpunk 2077's Night City feels alive and bustling. It was incredible watching V walk through the streets and seeing hundreds of characters walking, playing, talking, and fighting. It's not clear how dynamic this world is. However, we passed by a crime scene in one neighborhood, and I'd like to know whether that crime scene will ever get cleaned up or if it's a static landmark in this area. What we also really love is how deep the characters and their motivations appear to be. The world feels absolutely bursting with factions and cultures. During the demo, we were recruited by a fixer named Dex to track down a piece of powerful tech as a way of proving ourselves a worthy freelance for hire. That simple mission put us in the sights of a corporate agent in full damage control mode, trying to reclaim a shipment of stolen military tech. It was completely optional as a decision, but we decided to strike a deal with her and help her reclaim the kit to save face in exchange for the one item that Dex needed. We went to the gang hideout and decided to play it cool, offering to buy the gear instead of taking it by force. Things almost went bad, but we managed to convince their leader that we were straight, and he gave us the item as he plugged the currency chip into his computer. Only then did he realize it contained a virus made by the corporate agent. She had betrayed us all and got involved when she said she wouldn't. It's almost overwhelming trying to stay on top of who is who and what they want, but it also means that Cyberpunk 2077 feels fleshed out and layered in a way that very few RPGs ever achieved. At least that's based on what we've seen so far. So basically, like, this is what you hope and what you expect from an RPG. You hope to see huge branching options, and you like my gauge for a successful RPG is if I can play it while watching Family Guy or South Park in the background, it's not doing a good job. And the reason I say that is because if you can play it with a total distraction, a complete distraction off to your right, and you don't even have to think about it, and it's still easy to play, and you're getting through dialogue sequences, you just mindlessly are hitting A, and that's it, then that obviously is not demanding your focus, and that's not interesting enough to maintain your focus. It's just sort of a waste of everybody's time. And I think that that's what a lot of modern RPGs fall into. But certain games like Divinity Original Sin 2, like The Witcher 3, require your attention. And that's when I find it most engaging and intriguing. And I'm glad to hear that the characters are at least seemingly working in the same way in this game. Now, there's other things that we could talk about, like multiplayer support and all of that, microtransactions. There's this little clip which was taken out of the trailer, and it's basically a little way for them to answer some quick little questions. And it's what you would expect. Like, it's how big is it? Seriously big, but to be honest, we have no bloody clue as of right now. Microtransactions in a single-player role-playing game, are you nuts? So, like, clearly they're aware of what people are worried about, and they're answering those questions. It really is just shaping up to look like an incredible game. I can't wait for it. I don't want to say a ton about it because we don't know, and it has the potential to change. But what I can say for sure is that this game has the potential to be one of the greatest RPGs in the modern day, like it's or potentially ever created. It's really shaping up to be something special, and that of course brings us to everyone's favorite punching bag, Fallout 76. Now, Fallout 76 is, of course, coming from Bethesda Game Studios, which is the studio that has made Skyrim and Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 and Oblivion. Like, they've made some of the fan favorite RPGs of all time. And so when it was announced that their next project was going to be an online Fallout game, people understandably got a little worried. And when we found out what the game actually is at E3 this year, some people got relieved and some people got even more panicked and worried, and for various reasons. So Fallout 76, always online. You have to play it while you're connected to the internet. If you're not connected to the internet, you can't play it. After launch, they're going to add support for private servers or peer-to-peer, it would appear. That was a pun. But again, it's not clear when that's going to come. It's like mods on consoles at launch that was not a thing that actually happened with Fallout 4. So it could be a few months after, but as of right now, the game, when it launches, will not support private mods, only Creation Club stuff. It's not going to support hardly anything. So that is an important factor to consider. As for other elements, yes, you can play it online single player, so you don't have to play in a party, but you're still going to be encountering other players. And like, here's the thing about this whole concept. I'm okay with it because it makes sense. You're exploring the wasteland, and previously the argument against having an online Fallout game was, well, it's always been a single player experience that we focus on. And secondly, you're supposed to be the lone vault wanderer. You're the one person in this wasteland, and if you had 500 other people exploring the wastelands too, it wouldn't feel desolate. But what they've done is they've removed human NPCs. So there's still ghouls that you'll encounter. There's still robots and things like that. Potentially super mutants that you'll also encounter that are not like human controlled, that are still NPCs. So the claim that NPCs are gone completely is not true. But what it does mean is when you encounter people, they will be people. They're going to have their own completely unpredictable motivations. They might come up to you, they might lie to your face and say, I'm just looking to trade. And then once you turn around to open your chest, they pull out a mini nuke and nuke you. Or they could be totally honest and they're just looking for some help. And they're like, hey, I found a big cache over there. Do you want to come and help me? It's got some death claws. I don't have the ammo to take it out. If you help me, I'll split it with you. Like, maybe they're going to do that. You go over there, you help them, and they lied. They actually have an anti-material, like, death ray gun, and they take you out immediately once you help them take out the death claws. They take whatever you have, and then they raid the space, and they just were able to use it. Or maybe you flip it. Once you clear out the space, instead of splitting the treasure or whatever's there or the loot, you kill him and you just take everything for yourself. That's something that actually can happen. And so that, as a concept, I'm totally okay with. It makes sense to me. It really does. And so I'm okay with the core concept of Fallout 76. What is frustrating is that this company is world renowned for their single player games and their single player RPGs. So that's why if you approach this game like really as a title from Bethesda, it's going to be disappointing and it should make you sad inside. But if you approach it as like, oh, a cool Fallout spinoff that's online, I can play with my friends and I can have totally unpredictable experiences. As like in that regard, it's pretty cool. It's pretty awesome. So a lot of people are freaking out and upset about it. I think it's intriguing. I think it's because it's not a main entry in the Fallout series. Who really cares? To have a game at all is pretty cool. It looks really like, from all of the interviews Todd Howard has given, this game was basically designed by itself anyways, because every game that they've released has had a multiplayer component designed for it, but never launched and never released. And Fallout 4 had a multiplayer system designed in it as well, and that turned into Fallout 76. Whereas in other games, when they developed it, it never came to fruition. It never released. Whereas this game, they're like, hey, this multiplayer version works. Instead of adding it as like a DLC to Fallout 4, why don't we just release it as its own game with its own map and own mechanics and own stuff? So that's what they've decided to do. And in that way, I support it. I'm intrigued. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to play it. I'm sure it's going to be fun. I don't expect it to be a single player game. I don't expect it to be a story-based game. I expect it to be a fun co-op run and gun game set in West Virginia that has some cool open world design. And my main criticism of Fallout 4 was that if you approached it as a single player RPG, you would have a miserable time, because that's not what it was. If you approached it as a single player open world shooter, like exploration adventure shooter, you'd have an amazing time, because that's what they're really good at, world design. So the fact that they've doubled down on that, and that I'm going to go into Fallout 76 expecting that to be the focus and understanding that that's what they're trying to do, is to give you an open world that's big and fun to explore, and that they're also going to double down and give you a wide array of weapons that you can use. You can launch nukes at each other. Like, it's going to be pretty cool. So I'm actually intrigued. I'm open to it, but this is no RPG. Do not be mistaken. It's not. It's just not. So that's okay. I'm not going to be one of those YouTubers who freaks out and starts calling people names and crying and saying I'm pissed off and this is unacceptable. Because really at the end of the day, I'm just glad that we're getting something, but you know, it's not an RPG. And if we understand that, then that's okay. So that leads us into the third kind of surprise RPG of this year, which is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. This game kind of came out of nowhere. Everyone knew that we were getting likely another Assassin's Creed. We just weren't sure whether or not it was going to be set in Greece. So this game, apparently they've added dialogue choices, dialogue options. They've added, to some degree, branching narratives. We don't know to what extent, though. Is that like, oh, you can play as two characters, male or female, and there's two possible endings, as male or as female? Or do they mean like, yeah, you can end quests, you can alter the course of history, you can do all of these things. It's set 400 years before Origins, so there's a lot of room for shoving it this way and that way. And basically with these games, you can say, yeah, there's branching narratives. I like to think of it as having two long strings, or like a string, tied. This is where you start the game. That will always be the same. And then this is where we want you to end the game, right? So we got two strings. This is where, or a long string with a ton of slack in the middle. This is where we're starting the game. This is where we're ending the game. We know we need you to start here. We know we need the character to die to this character in this place, in this boss battle right here. Just for poops and giggles. Wow. But this string in between is your path, and you can wiggle that, you can finagle it, you can arrange it in any such way. It could be a straight line, it could be a straight line veering this way and then back. It could be a squiggle line looping back and doing all sorts of craziness. But your start and end destinations are going to be the same. How you get there can be wildly different, but your start and end destinations will always be the same. Some people love that. I'm okay with that personally. I would like there to be a little wiggle room in the ending, so I feel like there's actual consequences to my actions. But if the cost of having an RPG where I can role play as my own character, my own version of this character, make horrible decisions, be a terrible assassin, or be an awesome assassin, do all of this stuff, I'm pretty open to it. Now, in terms of lore, how this is going to work out, it's going to be interesting as to what degree of choice they give you. Because, of course, in a real RPG, you should have the ability to make horrible decisions and break your game and ruin your character's life. And in Assassin's Creed, never before has there been support for just murdering civilians, for instance. You always get the little pop-up that says, Altair or Connor or Bayek or whoever didn't kill civilians. Don't do that. If you continue, it will result in desynchronization. Is that going to be the case in this? Or do you actually have the ability to screw everyone over because you're fulfilling the character's destiny that you've already started? Or are they going to explain it with like a new version of the Animus where you can explore the world as the character or as your ancestor saw it and lived in it, but you can make your own choices in order to reach a certain destiny? Who knows? Already it's kind of there, but they just don't talk about it. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, though, because there's a lot of intrigue, shall we say. So I'm really interested in what this game is going to have to offer. It looks like they've really polished it out. It looks like they've doubled down on things like hunting, crafting. Sailing is going to be a big part of this game. The map seems pretty large. It just seems intriguing. I'm really interested. It's not going to be a big step forward like Origins was. Nobody really expected that, though. And for anybody who was expecting to not get another Assassin's Creed for another year, that was never going to be the case. Ashraf Ismail said many times they were always going to take 4 years to develop Origins. It wasn't changed after Unity. They started work on Origins set in Egypt right after they finished Black Flag, and they knew that they were going to take 4 years instead of 3 to develop it, including extra time on engine optimization to go bigger, go better, because they were going to have a movie that released in 2016 that would take the place of the game, so that they could focus advertising on the movie and instead reroute focus towards the game and balance all of that. It just was a coincidence that Unity bombed and that the movie sucked as well. So we'll see what they do moving forward. But if they decide to go to like a biannual release schedule for Assassin's Creed, we aren't going to see that until probably a year or two out. So next gen consoles, basically. So I never expected them to take another year off. It was never really implied that was going to be the case. But Greece is an interesting setting. My one frustration is that it's not that much different in terms of stylization than what we got in Origins. Of course, it's going to be a little more lush. The naval combat is going to be a big factor. So I expect this one to be very similar in style and approach to Black Flag. So I think it'll be a nice approach. It's not clear where the game after that is headed. We'll see. I still think really shaking it up and going to like a more modern setting. I loved Assassin's Creed Syndicate's setting. I freaking loved what they did with that. Getting to play through World War One segments was really cool and worked very, very well. I think they could double down and do that. Getting to play through World War Two segments in Unity was really cool, so I think they could double down and do that. As for everything, I think it's just going to be interesting to see where they go. All of these studios, like throughout the course of this video, we've been discussing RPGs in the modern day, mostly Cyberpunk because it's by far the most interesting, and really it's the only game as of right now that is really trying to be a AAA single player RPG. All other developers have basically abandoned it. Weirdly, we're talking about a game now, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. We're talking about Assassin's Creed being one of the only pillars of hope for single player RPG players in the entirety of this year's lineup, and that's a little sad. I mean, or maybe it's hopeful. Maybe like that's, I'm not sure which way to flip it. Is it sad that we've gotten to the point where now Assassin's Creed is making, or Ubisoft is making Assassin's Creed as RPGs, and that's what we are relying on, and we can't even rely necessarily on Bethesda currently to do that? Or should it inspire hope that, oh crap, maybe they're coming back? We got AAA developers like Ubisoft trying to make their games more RPG focused. So maybe the industry is sliding back and is going to focus more on that in the future. I don't know. I don't know which way to swing it. I would love to hear your thoughts on it down below. Because I could be pessimistic about it. I could be optimistic about it. I don't really know which way to swing. Because I kind of feel both. I'm both glad in the direction that Assassin's Creed is going, because I've always thought with the money and the time that they invest in these games, it has so much potential to be so incredible, and I always felt like they were just falling a little short of what they could do. So to see that they're doing that now, I'm hopeful. I'm glad. To see where Bethesda's going, you know, of course, Fallout 76 is a spin-off title. It's basically, they already did the work for it, and they just were like, hey, why don't we just release this and sell it? That just makes sense. So I understand why that's a thing. Starfield will be, I'm sure, a great single-player focused game, and apparently Todd Howard has described it as the most ambitious sci-fi game you can imagine. So, of course, I'm open to that. And then, of course, Cyberpunk, everyone's freaking out about how ambitious that game is and how incredible it looks to be. But single-player RPG fans, there's not a whole lot for us this year. There just isn't, and that's okay. Like, I'm sure we're gonna run into something next year that'll knock our socks off, but who knows? Maybe the industry is moving past it. Maybe the industry is moving back towards it. There's ways to read it in both degrees, but we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose. But this year, what I can say, I'm really looking forward to Odyssey. I'm really looking forward to of course, Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm looking forward to Fallout 76, and I think those games are going to be the main staples of this fall. And then, of course, Spider-Man, which everybody's going to be playing, but it doesn't pretend like it's going to be an RPG. So I'm intrigued as to what this industry holds. I hope that you enjoyed this kind of impromptu, longer form of talk gaming. It's not that similar to what we normally do, because normally we do this live and it's a little more engaged. This is much more similar to what we used to do for the show, where I would just pre-record myself talking to the camera for an hour and then we'd upload it, and that was that. So if you liked this, if you want to see more videos like this, or maybe talk gaming, go back to this style, let me know. I'm going to try to sort out the Xfinity stuff, or internet stuff with Xfinity here as fast as I possibly can. I just don't want to start a big stream, get a bunch of people in there, and then have the internet crash once again. So I want to be sure and confident that it's fixed before that happens. But as I said at the start of the video, thank you all for watching. The best way you can support this channel moving forward, if you want to watch the show on the go, hop over to Podbean, and once again, links in the comment section or the description down below. And iTunes, the show's up on iTunes, so you can listen there on the go. But if you really want to financially support the show, of course, Patreon, if you want to support me there, even $1 a month, $5 a month, as much as a coffee, that makes a huge difference when we're talking about a ton of people doing that. So consider that. or if you want cool t-shirts and mugs, mouse pads and posters, all of that stuff, check out the merch store down in the description box below. Lots of cool stuff. It's cheap, it's affordable, and it ships internationally. Why not, right? But with all of that said, guys, thank you for watching. I don't mean to talk your ear off, but hopefully we had a good discussion. I feel like we did. I enjoyed this time I spent with you, even indirectly. But with all that said, thank you for watching. I love you all. Peace out, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.